Satnam, Yogis and Yoginis, hello and welcome. I hope you're doing well. We are getting very close to the Christmas season, 1 month away from it. And if you're surprised to see me with a turban and you didn't see the last video I did, then you can watch that one where I explain about my relationship to turbans and how, as much as I enjoy them, enjoy the benefit that they give me, I don't really align with the image of the Sikhs, and so I would like to be more natural and sometimes be able to, just show the way I associate more with my image. And so that's how I go, in the streets. If you find me in the street, you will find me without a turban. And so I wanted to also be able to, show myself in this way. And today we don't have anything particularly planned. Some comments I was getting in regards to the turban video I want to address, and I think it was Infinity who was writing in a comment asking me about alternatives to the turban, and I don't think I mentioned it too much on that video. For a while before I was wearing a turban, I tried with a cloth. So I would just do like a hat with a cloth. I had a friend of mine who liked to do sewing. She liked sewing, and so I asked her to do a few models of kind of hats, handmade hats, and for a while I was wearing those with some nice cloth that I had, nice Japanese cloth, and I would use that as an alternative to using a turban. But to be honest, I didn't really find much benefit to those. It's supposed to be, just because it's covered by a natural cloth, it's going to be having that effect of protecting you. But to be honest, I didn't feel as many benefits as I felt while I was using the turban, namely the pressure on the brain and the concentration of the energy and all that. It could be that there could be another form of head cover that is better than that. But anyway, so I don't find many alternatives. I would say that if you really want to experience the whole feeling of the turban, there's no alternative to the turban. The turban is the one that it does all those benefits. Still, you don't need a turban to meditate, to sit and to pray and to meditate. So that's is your choice on whether you want to use it or not. And I still plan to use it when I'm teaching trainings and when I'm teaching particularly Kundalini Yoga, but just for sharing these videos, I will not. Anyway, today I was, let me just share something I was reflecting, and then we will do a little bit of meditation, maybe some mantra chanting, something like that. We will see. Today I was listening to Henri Bergson's book, Creative Evolution. I was listening to I don't read books much. I listen a lot because I'm quite often in the car or I'm walking around, and I like to listen to some nice book. And I particularly enjoy when somebody has a good voice and they've worked on their voice and they develop this capacity to narrate a story or a book in a way that is engaging. And I don't know, it appeals to me a lot. And so I listen more than I read books nowadays. And Henri Bergson's Creative Evolution is quite amazing. That book is over 100 years old, and yet I think some of the ideas in that book are so refreshing, and I think they are perfectly valuable today. I have to be honest, it's very hard for me to read him. Of course, I'm reading the translation, the English translation, not the original in French. But he's, first of all, he's such a philosopher. He has such an incredible way of putting things into words. And then the translation is pretty good, but it's a very advanced English and also an old English. So to me, it takes a lot of brain power. So I've noticed that I cannot read/listen to that book when I'm driving. Actually, for that, when I have to just walk and listen to that. So anyway, today I was trying driving and it was very hard to keep up with the book and the street at the same time. But I captured one idea that he was mentioning that was very, very interesting. And that's about the difference between plants and animals. And he was arguing how there is no much difference between plants and animals, and anything that you may think that is purely a clear distinction between an animal and a plant, you can probably find an exception in the other one. So one of the main things is that plants can receive nutrients, namely carbon and nitrogen, directly from the mineral, so in mineral form, while animals cannot. And animals need to consume something that it already has received, integrated that nutrient. And that's why animals have to either eat vegetables, which have processed the nutrients from the soil, or another animal who has consumed vegetables. So how animals cannot do it directly. But then he will find examples. For this particular case, I think it was some sort of, I can't remember now, but there was some examples of animals who have, in some circumstances, they can receive those nutrients in the same way. And also examples of plants which don't just process directly the nutrients from the minerals, but actually consume other beings, like, for example, these carnivorous plants, right, that they eat insects. So, and he was naming a couple of different categories in which you would separate plants and animals, and naming exceptions to the case where he would find an animal that is the opposite or so. Anyway, what captured my attention was something that he mentioned about speed. He said, well, because plants can receive the nutrients straight from the minerals, from the soil, just capturing it, and there is such an abundance of minerals in the soil already, they don't need to move around to receive those. So they can just stay static and receive all those nutrients. And because animals cannot, they need to go and look for the place where they can find these nutrients. And that means having to move. Having to move implies the needing of a more developed nervous system, and so on and so forth. And I say more developed because, the plants will have like a very primitive sort of nervous system, and animals have to have a very advanced nervous system. The more it needs to do conscious actions, let's say, the more developed they have to be. So an animal will develop this nervous system, and the nervous system allows him to move, and moving is linked to the capacity to hold consciousness for the animal. And that's where my attention got very interested, because he was making a connection between being asleep, like the plant doesn't need to be making many choices because everything happens naturally. It's just picking up all these nutrients and it's just growing. And you could say in a way that this is kind of asleep. The plant is kind of asleep. And he was talking about how some animals also would sometimes, especially parasites, tend to grab onto something and then do the same as the plant, which doesn't move. So some parasites don't need to move. Once they lock themselves onto something, and then they receive they are sucking the nutrients from that being, whatever, and then they don't have to move anymore. And somehow they kind of fall asleep. So it's kind of like going into sleep. And then he was arguing how as animals become more advanced, as the nervous system becomes more advanced and the nervous system is connected to the brain, that gives a greater capacity for consciousness. And conscious choice is linked to action, and action links to movement. Therefore, a plant, a plant or like a tree, it doesn't need to move. It doesn't need to make much action. Therefore, it doesn't need much consciousness, and it doesn't have much support for extra consciousness. While an animal, which is an active being that is looking around the world for some food, he's going to have to be making choices, and that's going to require a certain level of consciousness. And the fastest you move, the more consciousness is going to need to be able to adjust quickly what his behavior is going to be. So I found that very interesting, because if we are now coming to humans, we talk about how humans are like an animal but more advanced, and the nervous system of humans is much more advanced than the animal, and therefore our capacity to hold consciousness is greater. And this is the whole key about yoga, right? It's about consciousness. So when we think about yoga and consciousness, we think, well, hold on a second, because when we do yoga and meditation, we actually sit and close our eyes and stay silent. And that is kind of like becoming a tree. And actually, I remember some practices from the Bihar School of Yoga, from Swami Shivananda's branch, where was that Karya Sterham, I think it was called. It's been a long time since I read those books, but this Karya Sterham was a practice in which you imagine that you are like a tree, you grow the roots down into the ground, and then you kind of feel like the body is like the branches, and so you are becoming very stable and creating some sort of psychic paralysis, something like that. So you put yourself in a position in which the body is not going to move, and you convince yourself that you are paralyzed in that way. And the outcome of this is that the body gets still and stops bothering you. Because the meditation, when somebody starts to explore meditation, they will find that when anybody who's probably listening right now has meditated at some point, and you probably experienced when you close your eyes and you try to meditate, the first two challenges that come is obstacles in the body and obstacles in the mind. This is the most common. So obstacles in the body. And generally, when we sit to meditate, it's often going into one direction or the other. So you will find that some days when you sit to meditate, the body is just very distracting. So you will feel one leg is falling asleep, or you feel the back is not fully aligned, or some pain in some muscle, or the clothing is kind of uncomfortable, or something that is bothering you. And generally, some days are going to be like that. You sit to meditate and you're kind of fighting to keep yourself concentrated on the meditation when the body is creating all these sort of distractions. And the other distraction, some days you don't care about the body at all, but it's just your mind is going all over the place, is thinking about 100 things, is trying to make some decisions that it doesn't need to make right now. It's remembering things that happen, or imagining things that are going to happen. Or maybe it's just very tamasic, very sleepy and hard to keep aware. And then all the challenges are happening in the realm of the mind. So these are the two general obstacles that often anybody encounters as soon as they start learning how to meditate. And so this practice, the Karya Sterham, I think it's called. I should check, but I think that's the name. You imagine that you are this tree, and by doing that, you minimize the distractions of the body. So when the body becomes into this psychic paralysis, it stays there, and you stop having all these feelings of whether the leg is asleep or the pain, there's some pain in the knee or whatever. Because if you adjust yourself into a comfortable posture, and then you can tell yourself, that's it, that's the posture, then you can forget about it. And when the meditation finishes, maybe some leg will have fallen asleep, but that's okay. You will wake up. You wake up after the meditation. That's fine. It's not a problem. But if you are fighting with a feeling the whole meditation, then you're not meditating. You're just fighting with a feeling. So this practice of becoming like a tree is very interesting. Now, why am I mentioning all this? Because when we are meditating, most of the time we try to do this meditation in stillness. Right? There is a form of meditation which is in movement, like walking meditations, but I'm not talking about those. I'm talking like 90-something% of the meditations are about staying still and then keeping your awareness centered around some focus, which can be the breath, it can be a mantra, it can be a yantra if the eyes are open, or tratakam at a point, like a candle or something like that. So you're trying to keep focused and focus aware, conscious, while staying still. Now, the whole prelude to this, I explained the difference between animals and plants, and how one of the biggest characteristics are that plants are kind of asleep in many ways. And mainly because they don't need to be awake to just be gathering all these nutrients and growing. While animals, they need their consciousness to go and hunt or go and look for food. So the implication is that throughout the different worlds, from the mineral to the vegetable world to the animal world to humans, the evolution in the animals, the moment that we become living beings, as we evolve up to humans, is kind of linked to movement. So the more you can move about and make your decisions, the more your system and your body has been developing so that it can hold more consciousness. So consciousness is linked to this movement. And now I'm saying, well, look, consciousness is linked to movement, and yet when we meditate, we try to hold still. And it's no surprise that when we are trying to hold still, how often do we go to sleep? You may experience this very clearly, that you are perfectly fine and awake, and maybe you slept 8 hours last night, and you are not sleepy, and you are perfectly fine. And then you say, okay, let's meditate, and you put your timer. And as soon as you close your eyes, the sleepiness comes in very quickly. And you can be like 10, 15 minutes, whatever time you spend meditating, very sleepy. And then as soon as the clock ding, and you come out of meditation, and you're perfectly fine. You're not sleepy anymore. You were only sleepy during the meditation. And so that's very interesting, because we were holding very still. And somehow by keeping still the body and hoping to keep still the mind as well, because the mind likes to go around. But if you say to the mind, look, chant this mantra, and then you capture the attention of the mind, then when the mind gets captured, somehow consciousness goes back into sleep like a tree. So I found that very interesting, how in yoga we attempt to reach a new level of consciousness. How naturally we know that when we are falling very, very still is when we are falling asleep, therefore we lose our consciousness. But in yoga, we try to cross that barrier and reach a new level of consciousness. We try to reach this consciously conscious or super conscious state by going through the point of sleeping. And that's very interesting. I've connected this idea of the going beyond the sleepiness. I mentioned it, I think it's in the mind course, when we were talking about Turiya, that I find very relevant that in Samkhya philosophy, when they describe the 4 states of consciousness, Turiya, the 4th state, the more elevated state, is actually after the unconscious state. Is Jagrat, Swapna, Shushupti, Turiya. So Jagrat would be the awake, kind of awake, like the regular awakeness, which is kind of, daydreaming, but it's also awake. Swapna is like dreaming, in dreams. Sushupti is asleep. And Turiya is the 4th state, the consciously conscious. And so it comes after Sushupti. And even though we know it's not a state linked to unconsciousness, it's actually more conscious than Jagrat, more conscious than awake. And yet that's the challenge as we become more still and the brain wants to go to sleep. Can we stay awake? Can we remain conscious? Yeah, this is the challenge. So I think that this ties in with the concept of lucid dreaming as well. We have some video in the channel about lucid dreaming, and I explained how that was my first experiences into yoga came through lucid dreaming. And I would have all sort of weird experiences of consciousness, because when you are lucid dreaming, you can make whatever you want in your dreams. And I would have all sort of wild dreams because I wanted to experiment. So I remember, for example, one night when I would go into this state of, and I would do it every day, So I was into the lucid dreaming and I was like, okay, what do I want to explore today? And I thought, well, you know what? You know how these flies have all these eyes? Well, the eyes is like many segments and they can see behind. And I was like, how would it be to have a consciousness that you can see not only in front, but also behind? And the moment I asked this, it happened because you're lucid dreaming. You can create your own reality. So, and then I could see behind me and in front at the same time. And I thought, well, if I can see behind, why not 360 degrees? Why not like a sphere of consciousness looking in all directions? And so in this lucid dream, I became a point of consciousness that was looking in all directions at the same time. Can you imagine how weird is this? Well, that was amazing. That this is the kind of states of consciousness that you cannot. It's very hard to imagine because we've spent all our lives. Anybody who has eyes and they can see, we spend all our lives, and our brain structures even are created so that we can see this forward side. Imagine if you can see forward, backward, up and down in all directions at the same time. Well, that's quite an experience. So that's how through lucid dreaming, which is, the mind going to sleep, dreaming and sleeping, and reaching a different level of consciousness and being aware of something different. The possibilities of what is possible, that doesn't sound good. The possibilities open up, right? What is possible opens up, and then you can, for example, see in all directions. So there is this kind of evolution of consciousness from stillness to movement, and now through stillness we try to reach another state. But there is some other thought that connects to this then, because what I was thinking today in the car is that the age that we live right now is an age of absolute acceleration. That is, when we used to have breaks, and I'm talking about our mind. I remember when I was younger and I wanted to learn a new language, and I read some suggestions saying, you know how much lost time you have, like when you are in the queue of the supermarket, time that you are not doing anything, you could be learning a new language. Why don't you create some flip cards, keep them in your pocket, and then waiting for the supermarket to be your turn, you get the flip cards and then you go through them and learning new words. And so I was doing those kind of things, and I was thinking like, how good. I'm not wasting any minute. I'm always engaged, right? Well, times have changed because now no one is still, or almost no one, right? If you're in the queue of the supermarket, who doesn't have the phone in their hand and they are like flicking away, and really quick, seeing one video, click, 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 very quick. And so moments which used to be stillness and quiet for the mind have actually become more accelerated. So we are operating all the time at a certain speed. Now, another example, right? When we learned to use computers, we had these windows. Windows appeared. Before we didn't have Windows, but then when Windows appeared, we had all these windows. And then tabs were invented, right? And you would be changing from window to window, alt tab, but now also tabs within the same window. So it's like the complexity of the attention is like multiplies. There's so many things, so many options calling for your attention, and the brain works so fast, and we're moving from one tab to another, from one window to another very quickly. And so quickly, that's the word, right? So consciousness is kind of going over all these places much faster. And then the moments that we have for rest, like going to the toilet, how many people are tick, 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 tick in the toilet, or in the bus stop, or in the queue for the supermarket. So what I'm thinking is that if consciousness has been linked to movement, and as an evolution from trees, plants, to animals, into humans, and we see now this world, the movement is accelerated, right? Even going to the street, the cars, everything is much faster. We used to walk by our own 2 feet. Maximum, you would take a horse, right? But now everything is accelerated. So could it be that this acceleration is pushing the human's boundaries to reach another level of consciousness? So I was wondering, how could it be possible that we as a society we as a humankind, as a race, are kind of evolving out of the limits that we had so far by being exposed to all this speed. And even social media is creating, because I always see social media like a lot of negatives associated with it. But could it be that this is training us, training our brains, training our neural systems to work in such a way that they are capable of holding a higher level of consciousness? So this is not going to be an excuse. I'm not going to rationalize this to give an excuse for social media and to make people more addicted to that. I'm trying to find the yin and the yang, the positive and the negative of everything, the light and the dark of everything. And then I'm considering whether social media has become, and the whole speed of everything, not just social media, everything around us that is faster, has become like the trigger. It's like a trigger for what is to come. And hopefully what is to come is not more mental illness and ADHD and all these things, but rather accessing new ways of processing information on our brain, which gives greater capacity to hold consciousness. I wonder about this. It's not a finished thought. It's just an open thought that I just had this morning. And so I wanted to share it and explore it with you. Let me know what you think. In any case, the path of yoga, whether we open up our brains to higher speed or not, in any case, the yoga, we are going to want to go back to stillness. Now, social media is like an in-between of what we can become. And let me give another more example of this. This is a concept that I remember listening from Ardaas Singh. He mentioned how, imagine that in the future we all develop our sixth sense and we are all capable of communicating telepathically. And so you can just think about your father and just instantly communicate with him and he can communicate back. Imagine that this was possible. Well, this is possible right now with, WhatsApp. So could it be that technology has become a bridge between what we can do right now with our brains and what we will be able to do with our consciousness in the next generations? And this is like a training of what is possible, right? It's like we are becoming accustomed to being available 100% of the time, all day. Anybody can contact us, send us a message. And could this be a training so that someday we don't need this? And someday we can all merge into a universal cloud, right? Rather than your iCloud or whatever cloud you use, can you plug into the universal cloud and can you communicate through that cloud? And well, if everybody can communicate, that the speed of which that data is going to move is going to be much faster. So we have to be ready to deal with that speed. So this has been a good training for us to be able to access a higher speed of communication. So I can easily see how humans or mankind is evolving to a new stage, something that we don't really know what it will become. But Schiff used to say that, maybe in 50 years, we will look back and we will seem like aliens to ourselves. We will look like primates, like monkeys or something like that. We would see that there has been such an evolution that it's hard to compare ourselves, like a leap in the mutation of the race. So I was just considering this, how the speed of everything around us is triggering that kind of mutation, if you wish. And then comes another aspect, not just, this is like an intermediate state. Then there is another second intermediate state. You are probably aware of the advances in artificial intelligence and the research that is being done on brain-human interfaces. So there is this, how is it called? Interlink, is it called? how is that this is by Elon Musk's company as well. I don't know if is it Interlink or, well, it's just they are developing these chips that they can embed into the brain, and they put sensors into the cortex to sense activity in the area of the brain which is generally associated to movement, and they can perceive when you want to move a hand, and so they can send the information to the computer outside. So it has a cable to communicate, or Wi-Fi or whatever, and you can Bluetooth. Yeah, you can access to some computer in the outside with this Bluetooth signal, and then control the computer in that way. So this has been already. There's been already. It's already being studied with humans. It was on primates a few years ago. Now it's already in humans, and it's very interesting. A person who couldn't. He's in a wheelchair. He has no access to his hands or feet, and he can control the mouse with the brain. Now, there were a number of already brain interfaces when I was studying in university, and that was almost 30 years ago. But this is with sensors in the neurons, and only measuring the neurons on the area that is focused on locomotive, moving the body. So the movement of the cursor with the brain is not made with, it's not like a biofeedback system mechanism in which they sense the electromagnetic fields in the brain, and then you modulate the fields of the brain to move the cursor, which is very inefficient, but is trying to move your hand when you are in a wheelchair and you cannot move your hand. Instead of your hand, you're moving the cursor. And then you can control the computer through your thoughts. And eventually you don't need to think about moving your hand. You think about moving the cursor, and then you're moving the cursor, and then you become very efficient. And then there is a bandwidth, there is a speed of data in which your brain can communicate with that computer. So meaning that if you have to move and click, we humans, we can use a mouse and click. And this person who is already doing the experiments, and he has already the chip, he's getting to the level where he is becoming really good at using his brain to move the mouse and clicking. And the research supports the idea that this is only the first test subject. This is the first experiment. And as we know with science always, this is as bad as it will get. So the technology will only increase from here, meaning that it could be that very, very soon, it could be that in X number of years, 5-10 years, these systems would be much faster than a human clicking, which creates a philosophical discussion, and maybe morals will come here as well, which is that people will start wanting to insert a chip into their brains, even if they are healthy and they suffer no problems with their body, but just because with a chip they could communicate with the computer much faster. There is also research in which they connect the chip not only to the area of the movement of the body, but to the area where you link to the area of the brain where we think what we want to say. Not the area of the brain where we say things, but where we think what we want to say. And it has also the research on this, and I think these are not with sensors into the neurons, but from the outside. I'm not 100% sure with this, but I know that for people who have speech impediments, maybe they have paralyzed half of the body, things like that, they reached over 90%, I think it was over 95% of accuracy in the computer sensing what the person wants to say. And that's even with a generalized training of the computer, not having a computer learn how the brainwaves of the person works, but actually just standard, without even tuning into the particular person, already 95%, which is a higher accuracy than most speech recognition systems we have. When we are speaking, I mean, it has evolved a lot, but not so long ago, you would click on the WhatsApp, for example, and speak, and it recognizes your words. Well, those words were not always very accurate, and only now we have reached the realm of 95% of accuracy. Not so long ago, it was below 60. So imagine if you could read that area of the brain that thinks what you want to say already at that accuracy, which means that people who have paralysis of the face or some speech impediment, but they think properly and they were speaking before, so they can think properly the words in their brain, and the computer understands and produces the words. Also with now AI, they can produce the words with the voice that he had, because we can do that as well. So the computer would speak for him. Now that's bizarre, but that's incredible. So what I'm saying now is that these computer brain interfaces have been created to access the area of the brain in which we move, like the hand and to control the cursor in the screen, and how we speak. So not what we think that we want to say, okay? Not just reading the thoughts, but reading the words that we want to say. But who tells you that this computer brain interface is not going to be evolved to the point that it's going to read other areas of the brain? Actually, most likely it will very soon. So what this means is that the way science is moving, these chips in which you connect your brain to some software external interface, this is becoming a reality. And so where am I going with all this? I mentioned how, coming back to the original idea, this was a big thought train to come back to the idea of movement and consciousness, from a tree to an animal to a human, and the evolution of consciousness linked to speed. And social media has increased the movement in which we operate the brain. And imagine if we can connect a chip that, like I was just saying, this person controlling with the brain, the cursor on the screen, he will soon be faster. People who are perfectly healthy will want to connect their brains to the computer to be able to utilize the computer faster and access information faster. And there will just be direct connection from the computer, from the brain to these computers, which means that the speed in which you are limited to is not the speed of the eye, which is how much? 26 times per second, I think it captures the image, or the speed of your mouse, physical hardware mouse, physical mouse, which is going to be slow compared to the speed that you have in your neurons, and you can access how many bits per second you can access in your brain. So the speed at which we are going to be processing information is going to be probably exponentially increased, right? The rate of increase, we have no idea how fast this is going to get, how quick. And so that's kind of scary in a way. I think there's a lot of concepts that will come in here, and there is computer games that explore this idea of computer, connecting your brain to a computer, which makes you also susceptible to viruses and things like that, and you can have all sorts of weird, funny, stories that you can imagine with this cyberpunk world, right? But taking it from the perspective of consciousness, could it be that that's also an attempt to try to breach the limitations that we have right now into, for example, using words and understanding each other through words? Or, we used to write letters. We don't anymore. Now we have WhatsApps, messages, emails, then WhatsApp. So it's immediate. The moment that these systems, these in-between systems are progressing in speed, could it be that we are evolving to a point where we can reach this level of consciousness where we can interconnect all to each other through this kind of universal cloud, and we reach a new level of consciousness, and maybe even shared consciousness, sort of like, like swarm intelligence, like one ant What can one ant do? What can a million ants do? And the whole swarm of ants has the capacity to build a bridge where one ant would not, right? So there is this swarm intelligence, or could it be that in humans as well, as we learn to interconnect our consciousness, not our brains, not our minds, but our consciousness, then we can reach a new level. That's an idea. That's a thought. And it has all sort of yin and yang implications, yeah? There is a number of consequences which are going to be karmic and a number which are going to be dharmic. But of course, from the perspective of yoga, we're going to be concerned with the dharmic and whatever is happening in the world, and this tendency is not going to stop. Like AI is not going to stop. So we have to think, how can we utilize this to the best of our advantage as humans who are developing their own consciousness? So that's the idea. It's possible that as we grow in speed in our interconnection, intercommunication, that it becomes even harder to actually stop and close our eyes and just be in silence. It's very, very, very possible. And but if you can, you have the capacity to communicate much faster, and you have the expansion of the consciousness to be able to manage all that amount of information. But that expansion of consciousness, rather than going out into the information, you bring it in and you focus it into yourself and reach the same outcome that we've wanted to reach since thousands of years when we talk about yoga, right? But with this increased amount of awareness and consciousness. It's possible. In any case, no matter what comes, no matter what is waiting for us in the future, the tools of yoga are still here, and they are still the same, and they are likely going to be used in the same way. They're going to be still valid and applicable in the same way, because we don't stop. The quality of our consciousness and our soul is the same, right? So the tools that we have to reach that are going to be the same. So that was quite a journey. If you are just connecting now, you will be surprised where we got to. But this was an idea coming from how from plants we evolve into humans, passing through animals, and how consciousness is linked to speed. And let's do something that is the opposite then. How about today we just stay in silence and stay in the stillness? Oh, my daughters are connecting online. Hello. Hello, Noah and Holly. Are you online? Well, those are my daughters using their mother's account. Are you well? Are you doing a break from school? All right. It's good to have your daughters online. Wow, yes. All right, so I've been talking for a while. I think it's good time to meditate today. And so, yes, you are doing a break from school. Everything is all right? Are you well? Happy? I'll see you later. I'll pick you up later. All right, so we're going to do a meditation in stillness. And how about if we try this becoming a tree that I was mentioning before, and then we will hold in the stillness. Love you. All right, so let's try this. Let's close our eyes. I encourage everyone to close your eyes. And now, because I've been speaking a lot, and you were listening, and your thoughts were very active, your brain is probably very active, so there's going to be a lot of movement in your thoughts. And it's going to take a while to slow down. So let's concentrate on the breath. That always helps. And something that helps also to slow down is to connect with the slowest of the elements. The more tamasic of the elements is earth. So feel the weight of your body. And if you are sitting, feel how your body contacts the floor or the chair or whatever you are sitting. And imagine that beyond the level of your navel, there is roots coming down into the ground. Yeah, your feet, your legs are like roots that are going down into the ground. And you know how roots are, that they divide and divide and divide and extend, looking for water? So, with your consciousness, extend those roots to make your tree very stable. The longer the roots, the wider the area they embrace, the more stable it's going to be. Every time they divide, they become a little bit thinner. Now, after you start imagining this, from the navel down becomes like the roots of a tree, and stop worrying about what happens there. Stop caring about feelings of the body. You don't have feet, you don't have legs anymore. It's just the roots of your tree. And imagine and feel how they extend deeper and deeper and wider, almost to infinity if you wish. Dividing and dividing and dividing, a little bit thinner every time, but getting farther and farther away. And the farther these roots go, the more stable is the trunk of the tree. The trunk of the tree is your trunk, is your body, is your spine, which will feel solid if the roots are stable. And when you reach that point of solidity and stillness, allow the body to stay in that position. Imagine that you cannot move even if you wanted to. Like trees don't move. So imagine that you stayed in that position until the meditation ends. There will be a breath moving, and the breath is like movement of energy, which could be like the inside of the tree. There is this liquid going up the trunk and the branches. Similarly, there's going to be energy flowing up and down through the body, and you will feel the movement through the breath. But the spine, which is the trunk of the tree, and above from your head, which is the branches, are still and doesn't move. You can even imagine and feel how from the head is like these branches opening up like a large tree, expanding, feeling also tall to capture the sunlight. You can feel the air between the leaves and the branches and the limbs. And there may be a very soft swaying with the breath. With the breath is the wind. As you breathe, you feel the wind blowing through the leaves and the branches and the limbs. And you allow the body to stay in that stillness of the tree. And you bring your awareness down from the branches and the leaves back down into the trunk, down into the heart of the tree. And feel this heart, how it's growing with the inhale and relaxing with the exhale. Bringing all your consciousness down into the heart of the tree. You don't need to care about the roots nor the branches anymore, but only the heart of the tree. And as you listen to the sound of your breath, you will hear that the inhale sounds very much like Sat, and the exhale sounds like Naam. So hear the sound of Sat, Naam in your breath. You don't have to say it inside, you don't have to chant within you. You are listening to the sound within you. And I'm going to stay in silence now so that you can listen to the Sat Nam. There is nothing else to think, nothing to decide, nothing to plan, nothing to do. Just listen to the Sat Nam. exhale. Inhale deep. And exhale. Inhale. And exhale. Wahuru. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the meditation. I certainly did. And thank you for being with me. If you enjoyed, don't forget to like, so on, so forth, blah, 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 blah. You know, the usual. Thank you very much. See you next week. Sadam.